Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be looking at the recent list produced by Rolling Stone magazine where they identified their 250 greatest guitarists ranked from 250 all the way down to 1. When I first saw this last week I thought, I really don't want to do a video on that, so I wasn't so keen. These lists are pretty silly, but then on social media so many people have been commenting about it and talking about certain people that didn't make the list, as people always do. And as a list maker myself, I know how frustrating that can be when you spent a lot of time putting a list together for somebody to point out that somebody's not on it. So what I thought I'd do was, why don't I make my list of 250 guitar players without looking at the Rolling Stone list, and then see out of my choices which made the main list, and then I can decide from my personal subjective point of view how much I agree with the list. And so I started to do that. I got to be honest, I got to 50. I came up with my 50 greatest, most important guitar players of the last 120 years, 100 years. I think I started around about 1925. So about over the last 100 years, I wrote that list out. I could only come up with 50. It was just, so 250 is a lot to come up with, I tell you. I don't know how long it would take for me to just go through that list on a video. Anyway, so I've made my list. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down my list. So this video is not only my critique of Rolling Stone's greatest guitarists of all time, but this is also probably, my greatest 50 guitar players of all time. Not 50 greatest prog or rock guitarists, just the 50 greatest guitarists of all time. Now, my list is not ranked. Mine is in the order, it's sort of in a historical order, so I haven't ranked it. Maybe I'll rank it for another video. But I thought it was interesting to sort of put them into historical order. Anyway, I'm waffling on. Shall we just kick in? And then once I've done this, I'll tell you what I think about the list. So, I started off with the two guitar players that I think are the fundamental guitarists of modern guitar playing, modern rock guitar playing, modern blues guitar playing, modern jazz guitar playing. And that's a duo, so I'm starting off with two in my first and second slot, which is in historical order. And those guitarists are Eddie Lang and Lonnie Johnson. These are some of the first guitarists to record guitar-centered records back in the late 20s, early 30s. And in doing so, they pioneered a lot of incredible stuff. Eddie Lang was seen more of a jazz guitarist and Lonnie Johnson was seen more of a blues guitarist. Really for this, because Lonnie Johnson then went on to have a sort of blues career in the mould of a sort of Robert Johnson. But he's actually an incredible jazz guitar player. And Lonnie Johnson really is the guy that invents single line soloing on guitar with a pick. He's the guy. Eddie Lang has a lot to do with it. So these two guitarists, for me, this is the bedrock of all guitar. So you'd expect to get them on the list, but they didn't make the list. So that's two that didn't make the list. Now the next one, of course, now this is an interesting thing about jazz. Jazz was not championed through the 1920s and 30s in America. The place of its birth, it was not championed. Out in France, there was a club set up to appreciate this jazz, especially hot jazz, and it was called the Hot Club of France. And a band formed around that called the Hot Club of France with the incredible Stefan Grappelli on violin and Django Reinhardt on guitar. And Django Reinhardt is one of the most important guitarists in history. And so that's my third on the list. Did he make the list? Well, he did. Yes, he came in at number 70 on the list, right? Django influenced a whole range of guitarists, but the guitarists we've just been talking about up until now, they're acoustic guitarists. The guitarist that really, we could say, invents electric guitar playing, expands on single note playing, lays the groundwork for bebop, lays the groundwork for a lot of the licks that guitarists like Chuck Berry are going to play later on in rock and roll. And I've done a video where I've said this is possibly the most important guitarist in history, is Charlie Christian, and that's who I've got on next on my list. Now Charlie Christian came in at number 78. As you can see, they've ranked Django higher than Charlie Christian. Well, I don't know. I would have them far more equal, but they roughly got them in the same place. They got them in the top 100 at least. The next great jazz guitarist to really take what Charlie Christian did and really expand on it is Wes Montgomery. That's the next guy I've got on the list. Wes Montgomery influenced not only jazz guitarists but rock guitarists. He has a big influence on people like Jimi Hendrix. So that's the next one I've got on my historical list, because I am jumping all over the place here. You can see the logic of my thinking. In terms of jazz guitar, I tend to think, Eddie Lang, Lonnie Johnson, Django, Charlie Christian, Wes Montgomery. That's the first four that I've written down. We are going to jump around a little bit in a minute. But Wes Montgomery really came to prominence in the late 50s. Now, he is on their list. He's at number 82. So we've just covered 60 guitarists. 50% of them are on the list, 50% aren't, which isn't too bad, right? Another guitarist I think that really influenced rock and roll guitar playing, and there's a whole host of these guitarists. I could have had Muddy Waters on there. It's a whole host, but I've pulled out two guitar players here. One is Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and one is T-Bone Walker. Now, they both make the list, of course, because these are two very influential guitar players. Sister Rosetta Tharpe is one of my favourite singers, one of my favourite guitarists. She's absolutely incredible. But Rolling Stone have put at number 6. Whereas T-Bone Walker is the guy that used to sling the guitar behind his head, play, play with it, all those tricks that we see, plus influence B.B. King, everybody. T-Bone Walker is an immense influence on guitar. And here we have him sat on the list, but he's at number 65. So Sister Rosetta Tharpe is at number 6 and T-Bone Walker is at number 65. That doesn't seem right to me. And the thing is with this list is we know that the idea of equity linked to identity has influenced the making of this list. I'm going to say no more. And of course, when it comes to black guitarists, if we were really being fair and just and basing a list on equality, there'd be way more black guitarists than white guitarists. In terms of the idea that I have about the history of guitar playing. Of course, Sister Rosetta Tharpe would be in there, but would I have her at number 6? So that is, it's not a criticism of the Rolling Stones list. Obviously, if they didn't do that, they would be slated for it. But it's something to point out that by doing that, you see guitarists. She's in the top 10, and I wonder whether she's there because she is the 6th greatest guitarist in the history of guitar, or whether she's the 6th greatest guitarist that happens to be female. Anyway, I'll move on. I'm only going to get myself in trouble. So, who else have I got on the list? Les Paul. I've got Les Paul on my list. Very influential guitarist, and also he really. He had hit records, so a lot of people heard him. People like Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck were all fans of Les Paul, especially Jeff Beck. And he used the studio in certain ways, and he invented one of the guitars on the list. And he's coming at number 68 on their list. So apparently Les Paul is not as important in the history of guitar as Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Right, the next person I've got on my list is Scotty Moore. I grew up working with a bunch of guitar players that came from the generation above me. They're the guitar players that really invented, rock and roll. The likes of your Led Zeppelins and your Creams and your Black Sabbaths and all that. And every time I've sat down with one of those guitarists, a fundamental influence on that generation was Elvis Presley's guitarist Scotty Moore, who really combines a sort of jazz guitar style with a country music style. It's that country thing that makes Scotty Moore so important. There's other guitarists around at that time that are also really important, but I put Scotty Moore on the list, and Scotty Moore makes their list. So now you can see that, Scotty Moore comes in at number 60. So now you can see that there's not that much difference in terms of my 50 most important guitarists and their 250. They're getting a lot of them. My next choice would be Lonnie Donegan. Now, Lonnie Donegan wasn't an incredible guitar player at all, but in terms of British rock music, I can't think of a figure that's any more influential than Lonnie Donegan, because people like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, they all came out of skiffle, and the king of skiffle here in the UK was Lonnie Donegan, and that approach to guitar playing, combined with maybe Burt Weedon, that's not on my list, I think really is one of the most important guitar players of the 20th century, but he doesn't make their list, which is understandable because, you know, I am a bit UK centric and Rolling Stone magazine is obviously American. The next guy on my list is B.B. King. I had to pick a blues guitarist. I don't want to fill my list up with, you know, Freddie King and Albert Collins and, you know, all these, you know. Oh, I love blues guitar. I love all those guitarists. The one I picked was B.B. King. Of course, he's on their list, and he comes in at number 8. Now, we've got on my list Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry is the guitar hero. A lot of those American rock and roll bands in the 50s are basically based on jump, jive, rhythm and blues bands like Louis Jordan. Saxophone up front, you know, double bass, drums, maybe a little bit guitar, but, you know, not up front. And when we think of something like Bill Haley is basically a rhythm and blues jump jive band with country music influences in there. The two guitarists that really lay the groundwork would be Scotty Moore and Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry is the guitarist. You know, Johnny B. Good, one of the first guitar heroes, and he pulls together a whole width of influences there. So I've got Chuck Berry on my list. They've got him at number 10, right? Now, I've got a couple of guitarists that didn't make their list. It's understandable. These are more British-centric guitarists. The first is Hank Marvin, the guitarist from the Shadows. You know, Hank Marvin was possibly the UK's first guitar hero, and he influenced a generation. And of course, the British generation of guitar players are the heavyweights, you know. And I don't think any guitarist that came up in the 60s didn't listen to Hank Marvin. He was a guitar hero, right? He didn't make their list. The other guy is Cliff Gallup, who is Gene Vincent's guitarist. He didn't make the list. He was a big influence on Jeff Beck primarily, and a whole host of other guitarists. Incredible guitar player, and he didn't make the list. He made my list, so far I think they're doing pretty well. Right? In my mind, as I'm coming into the 60s, I think, well, it's the Beatles, right? So I'm not going to put John Lennon on the list. Definitely not Paul McCartney because he played bass, which the Rolling Stones magazine did. They put a bass player on the list. But I did put George Harrison. Obviously, you know, people saw the Beatles and they wanted to pick up instruments. They wanted to play like the Beatles. This is, you know, goes without saying. George Harrison's actually coming at number 31 on their list, which is quite surprising. As is my next choice, Eric Clapton. You know, I've complained about Eric Clapton here because I think, you know, once he'd broken ground in the 60s, he became a bit of a snooze fest after that. But, you know, up till Derek and the Dominoes, he's very, very important, and his groundbreaking work in the Blues Breakers and Cream and the Yardbirds is seminal. It's the beginnings of rock guitar. So for them to stick him at where they put him, number 35, it's Eric Clapton. Whereas Jeff Beck, which is the next one on my list, they've stuck at number 5. What's the difference between Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton, really? What's happened is Jeff Beck's died recently, and all these plaudits have come out and said how wonderful he is. The same thing will happen if Eric Clapton does it. But of course, Jeff Beck hasn't been going around saying awful things about the vaccine and have a history of being a racist. And I think, you know, this is the thing about this Rolling Stone list. I'm not criticising it, I understand it, but it does reek of that sort of let's step carefully with our choices. Nothing to do with musical ability, you know. But they did put Ike Turner on the list, and it was someone I missed. And this is the point, I'll say it now. When I read the list, there were so many choices on there when I thought, oh, I didn't think of that. That's a really good choice. And Ike Turner is one of them. He's one of the most important guitar players in the history of guitar playing. The next one on my list is Jimi Hendrix, of course. So I've got that trio where we've got Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimi Hendrix. It goes without saying that on the Rolling Stone list, Jimmy came in number 1, which is interesting because I think Jimmy's influence and perception in the general public's mind is diminishing compared to when I was a kid. Jimmy was the man. But I think if you spoke to most kids about rock guitar playing now, Brian May would be the man. You know, such is life. Right, the next one on my list is, of course, John McLaughlin. He came in at 72. He would have been at number 1 on my list, or maybe number 2. Which is okay, number 72. I looked at a few places above him, And just above him was Robbie Robertson from the band. So they think that Robbie Robertson is a better guitarist than John McLaughlin. In what respect? Even take the technical ability out, influence, you know, what, popularity, iconicness, however you measure it, John McLaughlin is better than Robbie Robertson in every single way. Robbie Robertson was a great songwriter. He was a good guitarist. He played a functional job, played the guitar. I'm sure there's some moments on the band's records, which is a band that I find completely tedious, but I'm sure there's some lovely moments on that if you like that type of thing. I don't anyway. So, but it does seem, even being objective, it seems mad that these mainstream press cannot see the difference between these musicians and just really don't value someone like John McLaughlin. Really, they don't value him. They put him on because they know guitarists like him. You know, they never want to deal with the music. And as I trawled through a bunch of trendy guitar players on this that I've never heard of, in bands that have probably been around for about a couple of years, right? I thought, yes, they would need to, you know, appear equitable, right? So they're not meritable, but equitable, and their need to look cool is what makes this list so pants. And I think my opinion about this list is, bearing that in mind, I think it's a pretty good list. Because what else are we going to expect from Rolling Stone, you know? The next guitarist on my list is one of the greatest guitarists that ever lived, the incredible Lenny Breau. Of course, didn't make their list. Of course, they didn't. He's too obscure, too weird, and too good. The other guitarist that made my list is probably the greatest chord player in history. Is Ted Green. Ted Green wrote the chord chemistry book that's influenced everybody from Pat Metheny to Steve Vai. And since the internet's come out and people have been able to post up videos of his playing, he has sort of arisen within the guitar world of being possibly in the top 5 greatest guitarists of all time. I believe that is true. But of course he didn't make the list. The next guy made the list, Tony Iommi. Tony Iommi, with his no fingertips, you know, he pretty much invents heavy metal, without a doubt. You know, Django Reinhardt influenced guitarist, creates heavy metal. Incredible moustache, comes from up the road in Birmingham. I've met him a number of times, you know, and he's a lovely guy. All in all, Tony Iommi needs to be high up on the list. He is high up on their list as well, at number 13. That's what you know, just deserves. Right, getting to the 70s now, aren't we? So we're going to have some prog guitarists now. So on my list, who would I have on my prog guitarist? So the first guitarist I came up with was Steve Howe. I think Steve Howe is an iconic guitar player. Sounds like nobody else at the time. He combines flamenco, classical, blues, slide, country, jazz. You know, he's an incredible guitar player. They've got him at 123 on the list. You know, how many guitarists do they think was better than Steve Howe? It's a joke. And the other great prog guitarist, of course, is Robert Fripp, who they have measured much higher. They've got him at 59. So it just goes to show, if you go on YouTube with your wife and you can flash out your great big guitar licks and knowledge of whatever Robert Fripp does with his wife when he goes on, then you know, you can get a lot higher on the list. So Steve Howe, have a chat to your missus and see if she's, you know, willing to put a tight t-shirt on and sing some Nirvana songs, because that's how you're going to make it in the world today. Right, the next one on the list for me is one of my favourite guitarists, and I thought I'll sneak this guy on. I don't think it should really go, but he's one of my favourite guitarists. It's my list, I'm going to put him on, and that's Carlos Santana. So I was surprised when I saw their list that he came in at number 11. But of course, Carlos Santana, unlike all these other virtuoso guitarists on my list, he had a few hit records a few years back, didn't he? And so Carlos is on the list, you know. There's 3 folk guitarists, British folk guitarists, that laid the groundwork for that style of playing, which is the way the guitarists like Nick Drake and John Martin come out of. Although those guitarists are important, but I picked 3 anyway, just to represent that. I'm not hugely knowledgeable about this, but the guitarists I picked were Johnny Renbourn, Richard Thompson and Bert Jansch. I thought I'll stick those on the list. 2 of them made the list, Richard Thompson and Bert Jansch. Richard Thompson coming in at number 63 on their list and Bert Jansch at number 81. John Renbourn didn't make the list, which is surprising. Probably because he died. Another left field one, I thought I'm going to stick this guy on my list. Let's put 2 free jazz guitarists on the list. So I stuck Sonny Sharrock and Derek Bailey. And I was surprised that Sonny Sharrock was on their list And he was also in at 1986, which is, I think, is an attempt for them to look cool. But Derek Bailey, of course, didn't make the list, and which is a shame, because in terms of free improvised guitar playing, he is the god of that. He really is. You know, way more than Sonny Sharrock is, I would say. Derek Bailey represents a sort of European intellectual sort of chamber music view of free improvisation, and Sonny Sharrock represents that sort of primal scream back to the roots of the blues free improvisation. Love them both. I love them both. Right, next one on my list is Jimmy Page, of course, guitarist in Led Zeppelin, everyone's favourite rock band, unless you like Queen, because you're like 14 years old. But anybody who's, you know, an adult, Led Zeppelin should be their favourite rock band, and he comes in at number 3. That's absolutely great. Another one I put on the list, which is a personal choice of mine, one of my favourite guitar players, is Frank Zappa. I put him on the list. I think he'd make the list, but not as high as they put him, which is at number 46. It's funny how Zappa has slowly regained some sort of well, not regained. Well, yeah, regained, because he was critically lauded in the 60s with the Mothers, and then they all hated him for the rest of the time. And even though he's come out with that potty mouth and all the political incorrectness, they've still put him on the list. And what the reason for that is because no story has come out yet in the media that has put him down for, you know, singing like Jewish princess or something like that. Oh, why would I want to mention that at this time? Right, so Andy, you just keep always treading carefully, aren't you? Right, next guitarist on my list, one of the most important guitarists in rock music, probably the first shredder, huge influence on future guitarists, huge influence on metal guitarists, is Al Di Meola. Didn't make their list. That's an omission for me. That is an omission. And then I started to think of the sort of guitar players that laid the groundworks for you know, heavy metal playing, especially the new wave of British heavy metal, and I jotted down 2: Uli John Roth from the Scorpions and Michael Schenker from UFO. Huge guitarists. There's other ones in there as well. Neither of them they didn't make the list, and I think when you look at the sort of trendy nobodies that are on that list, I think that is an omission, especially Michael Schenker. Have I covered Steve Vai? Because now we're getting into those 80s rock guitarists. Oh no, my order's a bit strange here. So when I start to think about 80s rock guitar players, my mind went like this. Steve Vai, Eddie Van Halen, Sean Lane, Yngwie Malmsteen. They're the ones I jotted down. There's a whole bunch of other ones, you know, like George Lynch, incredibly important guitar players at that time, but I haven't put those down. Now, Sean Lane didn't make the list. That is an omission. Anyone who plays guitar properly and knows about guitar will have rated Sean Lane as being one of the most incredible guitar players that's ever lived. He didn't make the list. Who else? Eddie Van Halen, on the other hand, he's at number 4. Why is he at number 4? You know, why is Michael Schenker not on the list, not in a 250 guitar players? But Eddie Van Halen's at number 4. It's to do with public recognition. You know, anybody knows back in the early 80s that Schenker and Eddie Van Halen, they were perceived exactly the same, you know, by rock fans. But as time has gone on, especially because he's died, I think, and there's been a big hoo-ha around him, he gets in at number 4. It's absolutely ridiculous. Steve Vai came in at 127, and Joe Satriani, which is another guy that I put on my list, comes in at 94. That's not right. Satriani's great, but he isn't Steve Vai, and everyone knows that. But he probably plays some nicer tunes. Angus and Malcolm Young I rated together from AC/DC. They do make the list at number 38. Another guitarist that emerged in the 80s that was absolutely mind-blowingly incredible and changes the guitar and had such an influence on sort of the current Instagram guitar players is Stanley Jordan. Stanley Jordan didn't make the list, as didn't Alan Holdsworth. And that's the thing that's all over the internet, is that Alan Holdsworth, that, you know, any self-respecting guitarist is going to put Alan in, you know, at number 1. This is the difference between people who know and people who don't know, right? And Rolling Stone must be savvy enough. They must have a conversation. Shall we put Alan Holdsworth on? And I promise you they went, yeah, but no one's heard of Alan Holdsworth. So he doesn't make the list. You know, the greatest guitarist that ever lived doesn't make the list. Didn't expect him to be in the top 10, maybe not even the top 50. This is the big mistake they made. Rolling Stone, you made a mistake there, and it's all over the internet. Shall we carry on? Yngwie Malmsteen didn't make the list, right? Andy Summers from The Police, the guitarist that changed the face of guitar in the 1980s with his chorus pedal and his arpeggiated sus chords, right? Number 250. So you just added one more person. Andy Summers wouldn't have got on this list. In terms of metal guitarists, and, a lot of them put the guys from, Metallica, Kirk Hammett's on there. And I thought, well, where's Metallica? Where's Anthrax? Where's Megadeth? Where are they all coming out of? They're coming out of the British wave of new wave of British heavy metal. And who's the guitarist that probably we know influenced them all because they've championed him? It's my mate from up the road, Brian Tatler, and I've put him on the list, and I'll message Brian. He's not really my mate, I've only met him about twice, but he's a local guy, right? I've put him on the list. Brian Tatler should be on the list, and they didn't put him on the list, right? Shall we move on? I put Adrian Belew on my list, and I didn't expect them to put him on. And they did. They put him at 118, which is great. Johnny Marr I put on my list, a bit of a nod to sort of those 80s indie guitarists. He's a fantastic guitar player. He came in at number 56. And I put Thurston Moore for that sort of noisy, noise rock 80s thing. And I really did like a Sonic Youth when I was coming up. Thurston Moore came in at number 57. Right, let's get back to some fusion guitarists. I've got John Scofield and Pat Metheny. Pat Metheny did make the list at 157. Scofield didn't make the list. And neither did Scott Henderson. Scott Henderson would be in my top 5 guitarists. In terms of like a jazz fusion, a proper fusion guitarist, in terms of guitarists that can play it all, rock, jazz, fusion, he can get into funk, and he's one of the greatest phrasers, one of the greatest. Scott Henderson, I think if I had just had to list one guitarist for the rest of the time, it'd be Scott Henderson. I really do, and he's not on the bloody list. Dimebag Darrell is from Pantera. I love Dimebag. I think he's an incredible guitar player, and I think he pushed guitar playing on in the 90s when Pantera emerged, and he did make the list at 131. Whereas Tom Morello is another guitarist to put on my list. He made their list at number 18. Right? And there, I have now got to the end of my list. Now, when you count them up, you'll notice there wasn't 50 there. I think there was 52. Now, on the whole, I think when I go through my list, there is 10. Out of 50, I think there's 10. Shall I add this up? Because I counted it up when I did last night, and then I can't remember. I'm just going to add this up now. Right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, Eric Clapton 35, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, yes, so I think my list is 52. So they got 21, so I did get that wrong. And so on my list, they're just under half. I think that's pretty good in considering it is my subjective list. I think it's a pretty good list. It's an interesting list. It gets into all the nooks and crannies of all different styles of music. So, surprisingly, what I'm going to say, Rolling Stones, your list, thumbs up. I thought it was pretty good. I'm going to finish there. If you like this video, like it. If you want to subscribe and see more, then please do that. Don't be shy of subscribing. And if you really want to know what's coming up next, ringle dingle dingle the old notification bell. Is it still there? I was looking for it the other day. Anyway, ring the notification bell. If you want to support me, you can become a patron and come and join the fun. And there's lots of fun going on. It's not just a few old rubbish videos up there and a picture of me walking the dog. Although there are pictures of me walking the dog, there's all sorts of shenanigans going on. That's what happens on my Patreon, shenanigans. There's not that much shenanigans on YouTube. So if you're watching me and going, I like Andy, but I really would, appreciate if you just did a little bit more shenanigans. Well, I am, and it's over on Patreon. If you're not interested in shenanigans, then you can just give me money anyway by going to my YouTube tip jar and put some money in. Right, there's a lot going on in my life at the moment, and that YouTube tip jar is like is the difference between me panicking and not panicking at the moment. I can't say much more than that. So everyone who's stuck money in, and I see it and I see the messages, to you all, thanks for watching this video. I'll see you on the next one.